What is up, guys? Welcome to the Real Life Podcast with your host, Tyler Oldroad. Today, we are going to be talking spay fishing with my friend, Adam Slavinski from Buffalo, New York. I'm going to invite him into the call, allow him to introduce himself, and then we'll just get into it, ask some questions. If you guys have any questions throughout the live stream, feel free to ask, but I'm going to try to get him into this call. What's up,
Hey
man?
man, what's going on?
Got to work, I see.
Yeah, what's going on?
Not too much. How about you?
No, not too much. Got a nice day on the river today, so it's going pretty good.
Nice. Salmon, steelhead?
Steelhead. So today we were on the Cattaraugus. Low water. We need some rain, but we're just starting to see some signs of some fish coming in, so that's pretty encouraging.
Yeah, down towards, well, I guess it's October already. I
It
can't
is.
tell you where the sun is going.
Yeah, and it's weird. It's like a late season this year. You know, we had such a hot summer here in Western New York. That we're almost like a good 3 4 weeks behind schedule right now. I mean, typically we have fish spread all throughout the Cattaraugus system, and
Yeah,
primarily we're just starting to see them push through the lower half of the river.
yeah, that's great. I mean, years back, I remember I caught my first steelhead on September 15th.
Okay, yep, yeah. No,
So,
it's typically Erie tributaries we have fish usually early to mid September. Like you were just saying. So we're just we're itching to get at them.
yeah, I can imagine. So I introduced you with your name. If you wanted to give a more better introduction of yourself, what you do, and
Sorry,
all the
give me
good
one
stuff.
sec, buddy.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time.
Let's wait for that phone to stop ringing. Yeah, no. So introduction. Yeah, my name's Adam Slavinski. I am actually the fishing manager over at our Orvis store here in Buffalo, New York. Born and raised here in Buffalo. Been basically fly fishing my whole life. My dad's a fly fishing guide, so it's made it a pretty, shorten the learning curve, we can say, to get back into this whole thing, which has certainly help me quite a bit. But yeah.
So how long have you actually been fly fishing? Well, probably since birth almost.
Pretty much since birth. I mean,
Yeah.
literally ever since I could hold my head up straight as a baby. My dad would put me in a backpack and have me out on the river. So I've literally been on the water almost my whole life.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And so primarily today I wanted to talk to you about spay fishing for steelhead, maybe some inland trout.
Yep.
Um, how long have you been doing that? Have you also been doing that as long as you've been able to, or is that something you kind of developed halfway through your career or so forth, whatever?
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, the two-handed fishing, again, I've pretty much been doing it, almost my whole life. I mean, my dad, was one of the first guys to use a two-handed rod here in Western New York. So that for me has been a huge help. And even as a little kid, as soon as I was starting to graduate into the our Lake Erie steelhead stuff, I would actually use like a single-handed rod and like a 10-foot 8 weight and use that little bottom fighting butt as like a little two-handed rod. So it's I've been doing it for quite a while.
That's awesome. So my question for you is why spay fishing? Is it for the enjoyment? How effective is it? Is there times where it outfishes, nymphing or even center pinners, which we tend to deal with a lot, at least in Western New York?
Sure.
Um,
Yeah, man. I mean, for spay fishing, I would say it's, not the most effective method that you could be using to catch steelhead. I mean, certainly, from the fly fishing aspect, putting an egg fly under an indicator will certainly be really productive. But, the cool thing for the spay fishing or swinging flies in general is, you're getting a lot more excitement. In my opinion, you're targeting those more aggressive fish that, have to be willing to come up and take your fly. It's you're choosing the more aggressive fish out of that, maybe that little pod, that when you do hook them, they are just going to give you an insane fight. So, that's kind of the trade-off is that you might not hook, quite as many fish, but the fish that you usually do get are quite a handful.
yeah, it's crazy because it is like that. You are picking the most. Like I think I've only cast a spay rod maybe two, maybe three times, and for no length of time, but I work on a private ranch, or I did, and we worked with the guests. And so in some of our downtime, one of the other guides was showing me how to spay cast.
Hmm.
And so I was just I mean, we have pellet head fish. They're just massive, oversized pellet head fish. But, I threw that cast out there, and I'm just a normal sized fish, like not one of our bigger fish, not one of our smaller fish. But that thing took so hard, I swear it burnt my finger. The line took so hard on my hand.
It's pretty crazy, man. I mean, you get some of these fish where if you're not really paying attention, they darn near rip the rod out of your hand. I mean, it's really intense.
That's crazy. So I kind of want to ask, do you think there is a time where it can be more effective than other methods, like when water's a certain level, a certain time of day?
Definitely, yeah. So, like right now, so like we'll bring it back to like, my home water, like, Great Lake salmon and steelhead, it's, this time of year, when that water temperature is, in that 50s, low 60s, you can definitely sometimes outfish, indicators, even centerpin anglers. Those fish are kind of ready. They're willing to go. They're at their most optimal water temperature, and they're ready to come up and take, a swung fly. They'll move. I'll see, fish move 10, 15 feet to come take a swung fly this time of year. It's pretty crazy. Where you'll start transitioning more into the winter times here when that water temp starts slowing down a little bit into the 30s. They'll get a little sluggish, but they'll still certainly be super aggressive and move towards a swung fly too. But definitely, if you're a beginner angler, beginning to swing flies, if you can get out, in that water temps, definitely in the 50s, that's prime swinging water.
And so I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. I got excited. I want to get into some of this tactics, but I did have a question. I know you've traveled quite a bit doing some fishing stuff. So where are some of your highlights as you travel and kind of spanning the globe, especially spay fishing? I know you've done stuff like in BC and stuff like that, I believe.
Yeah. So, again, because of my father, I've had, some insane opportunities to fish some pretty incredible places at a young age. I'm only 23, but, I've been fishing, doing some super hardcore Atlantic salmon trips up towards the Spey Peninsula for the last, 7, 8 years. I've had a few trips up to northern British Columbia, the Terrace area, doing that kind of stuff. I was supposed to be in Norway in June, but unfortunately COVID hit and all the travel plans got halted. But yeah, no, I've been incredibly lucky to, through my travels, pick up on, a lot of different methods, of the spay fishing aspect and kind of manipulate them to, the whole Great Lakes region, to make them, make it a little bit more effective for what we got around here.
And so you mentioned kind of some of the different spay methods there. So in my research, I found three primary types of spay fishing: traditional, Scandi, and Skagit. Could you kind of break those down just in their basic form, and which type do you typically use, and what type have you found is the best kind of for the Great Lakes area?
Sure, yeah. So, we'll start with, the Skagit concept. So the two primary, lines that you'll see in the industry nowadays are shooting heads. So it's not like your typical weight forward fly line. These heads are meant to carry a running line out to distance to effectively target, the where you're trying to fish. But Skagit lines, they're compact. These shooting heads are, nowadays they're anywhere from, 16 to 25 feet. They're pretty compact, but they're thick. They're short, little robust heads, and they're developed out on the west coast of America here in Washington on the Skagit River. Developed for casting big flies and heavier sinking line, sinking tips, sinking leaders for big steelhead. That's primarily what we'll mostly see used in the industry nowadays, especially here in the Great Lakes, because of their shorter nature, to the Scandinavian lines, which we'll talk about in a second. But those shorter heads around here in the Great Lakes, we don't have super massive rivers around here. Here in West New York, we have the Niagara River, but on the Niagara, a huge river, you're only fishing really the 15 feet from the bank. Those fish are. You don't need to cast, 150, 120, 150 feet, to target these fish. A 60, 70-foot cast at most is usually all you need. So that's typically what we're using is those Skagit lines, where we'll go into, the Scandinavian lines. So these lines are a little bit longer, a little bit lighter. So these lines are usually in like the 35-foot range. So get quite a bit more out of the Scandinavian heads, but they're more used for, again, those kind of lengthy rivers. These lines are developed out in out in primarily Europe, on those big Atlantic salmon rivers. You don't need to use quite as big a fly or heavy of a fly. And we can cast those significantly farther and still have a pretty light line to fish out those distances. So that's pretty much the big differences with those two. That's primarily what you'll see. And traditional, if you're talking like, the long belly or mid belly kind of a thing, those are super long. So those are kind of along the lines of like a Scandinavian head. But to even a more extreme, 50 to 100 feet in some cases. Back in the day they were using, you still see a handful of guys nowadays using them. Not quite as often though. But that's certainly a cool aspect of it to get into. And that's kind of the cool thing about spay fishing is, you kind of get into it and there's so many different facets of it that you can really dive into if you really get in and have a ton of fun with it. You can kind of find your own little hobby that you like.
Yeah, I mean, and that's fly fishing in general. I don't know if you can see the comments at all, but Ben on the Fly called you a 10 karma fisherman.
Yep. Thanks, Ben. Yep. Thank you.
But so the way I kind of understood the difference between traditional and the other two, at least when I was taught, you have to strip to that shooting head. That's kind of your sweet spot for the cast, correct?
Correct. Yep.
And then so I had to make, I believe he didn't tell me the name, but I believe it was a snap tee, and then you do your stroke motion.
Yeah, so there's in spay fishing, there's the handful of different casts that we can use. There's both what we call a sustained anchor cast or a touch and go cast. So we can really dive into that if you want to, but there's definitely a big mixed bag of different casts we can do that will kind of help us in different river scenarios, depending on structure that we have around us or maybe wind that day on the river. But yeah, no, there's typically all of them though. You're just transitioning to a point where you can bring that rod up, just like a single-handed roll cast. You're going to come up to what I call your firing position, make a D loop, having that line basically make the belly of a capital D with the straight end of your rod, coming forward to that nice crisp hard stop. And that's what will, with that shooting head, when you come to that nice crisp hard stop, that shooting head will take out what we typically have, a shooting line and carry that out to, any distance that you need.
So I don't want to get too in depth with the cast just because it's tough.
Yes.
Without having you presenting or whatever, but
yes.
Kind of, if someone was beginning, I personally use YouTube a lot as a great resource. What's something, or is there any videos that maybe you recommend, or teachers, maybe even guides where they can go out? Do you or your dad do any guiding with the spay rod?
Yeah, my father does quite a bit. He's starting to slow down now. He's starting to do a little bit more fishing, but he's definitely into it. And I'll do some stuff. I'll through the Orva store, we typically do on a normal year when we can do classes and everything. We usually do a handful of spay demonstrations here in Western New York, both on water and in shop. And then, yeah, I can certainly, if people either private message me or get a hold of me or at the store, usually we can set something up and do a little bit of casting on water. If people are having a little bit of trouble or have questions one-on-ones, and that's typically easier with spay fishing is, one-on-one help is pretty, important, just to really fine tune things. But, we live in a day and age where, like we have so much, so much content at our fingertips. We can, YouTube, like you said, is a huge help. And like I was saying with Skagit, lines and everything, there's a whole series of videos called Skagit Master. The whole first Skagit Master video is all casting. I highly recommend that video to everybody out there that is curious on it. And then both Skagit Master 1, Skagit Master 2 kind of dives into the whole fishing aspect after you make that cast, which is the important part. That's the part you're actually fishing. People think you got to have these beautiful, nice casts where, I've seen little sloppy casts that barely go out past the shooting head, catch more fish.
Yeah. So that's actually funny that you mentioned this, because I was just going to read you this quote from April Vokey. It says, "But the truth is that only 50% of my guests are competent spay casters. Regardless, the poor casters catch just as many fish, if not more."
Yeah, no, I
So
mean, go ahead.
where does that importance come in? Obviously you need to be somewhat efficient at casting, but where do you find that balance between casting and angling skill?
Sure, that's a good question. I mean, and she's totally right. I mean, you don't have to be an expert caster to be a proficient fisherman. I mean, you get, people think that, you have to launch, a huge long line, and, especially, being at the shop all the time, I get guys that come in that want to pick up a spay rod and just want to bomb a whole bunch of line and think that that's what they're going to be catching fish with, where we're using the two-handed rod and these spay fishing methods, these shooting heads for their ease of casting, and fishing these lines, and you can be 40 feet from you, and you know basically fishing more effectively than not, because having line control that I've seen in my history in my life is so much more important. Having that line control and knowing where your fly is fishing is so much more important.
So I wanted to get into a little bit of the lines. I know you work for Orvis, but what kind of brand lines do you personally prefer, and kind of along what lines are your reasoning for that?
Yeah, no, I mean, so again, I typically stick with a lot of Skagit lines, but Orvis, I'll just plug my little brand real quick, but
Yeah.
Orvis just came out with a beautiful line of two-handed stuff called the Mission Series, both rods and lines. And I've been playing around with the Mission lines from Orvis, both the Skagit and the Scandi heads. I've been loving the Skagit heads, but everyone on the market, pretty much every line developer has their own lines now, and it's hard to find a bad line nowadays. I mean, everyone has such great materials out now. I mean, Rio Airflow are next, definitely up there with premium rod or premium line brands. I certainly use a lot of Rio lines, myself as well. But I think it's a lot of info out there, but I think if people just remember that they're all basically the same line, it's just from different makers. I mean, it's easy to get confused out there. They're all the same line. So whatever line you like or have used before, stick with that company, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing with anything with rods. It's all about personal preference. It's like the rod's not what catches the fish. The line is not what catches the fish.
For sure.
Obviously, you don't want defective gear. You don't want knots in your line, so you can't get it out there. But it's the angler itself that catches the fish, not the equipment.
Yeah, correct.
I'm addressing that specifically to my dad. I hope he's watching.
Yeah, yep.
So when it comes to actually, you're on the water, you're fishing, you're presenting the fly. What kind of water types are you typically targeting? How do you vary your approach for different, if you do fish different water type, stuff like that, maybe line heads, sink tips, or all that stuff?
Yep, yeah. So good questions. So water types. I mean, that's a big thing. And that will change with seasons here. Like right now, we'll take for example, I'm fishing, low and clear water. The water isn't super cold right now. We're probably, getting highs in the 50s, probably just dipping into the low 60s. Today I'm focusing on, the more oxygenated water, the faster portions of these runs where you can find them. Stuff that actually has current right now. Like you'll find a lot of sections of my home river right now that are what I call that frog water, that flat water that basically doesn't move. And we typically won't see a lot of fish sitting there this time of year. You want to target that faster water, and anything. I would say the sweet spot is 3 to 5 feet water depth, and that's the easiest to fish. And but you can fish stuff. I mean, I hooked a fish today that was maybe in a foot and a half of water. They'll hide in water just enough to hide their backs, basically. So my biggest tip for low water is anything that looks fishy, that has a little green tint to it that you can't see the bottom, fish it. And for tips and stuff, I'm staying with my Skagit head. That's just my most versatile line. I don't have to take it off my rod all year. I can literally keep
Mhm.
the same line on there. And for tip wise, having a little variety of tips with you, maybe between 3 to 5 different sinking depths, is going to be advantageous to you. Like today, I was using a very light leader. My sinking leader was maybe it was an inch or two sinking leader. It was actually an intermediate leader that I was fishing. Where if I happen to fish a deeper run today, I could actually just take that leader off, loop to loop that system off, loop to loop a little heavier tip on that maybe sink at a 3 to 5 inch depth and fish that. So that's the other cool part about these rigs, is that they have a lot of versatility throughout the day. It's not like one fixed sinking line, your traditional sinking line, that you're kind of just stuck with. You can fish these different tips and fish at different depths of the water as we go. As we start transitioning here, if we ever get some water into these rivers again, we get these rivers going up to normal flows. We're typically going to be almost using, sinking tips all the time. That 3 to 5 inch usually is a good sweet spot for my area. Um, you don't want to necessarily be dragging bottom. You typically, I want to be try and get about a foot or so above the fish level, where those fish are sitting. And that's usually pretty good. And you can easily tell that. I get a lot of questions. How do I know what's the right sink tip?
Yeah.
If you cast it out there and, say you make a few, a couple casts, like I'll typically make a nice cast and I'll take a nice step and progress my way through a pool or run. If I don't feel the bottom at all, I don't feel any resistance on my fly, I might try and, put another heavier tip on. And by same token, if I go out and make it, 4 or 5 casts and you'll feel that fly just ticking along the bottom, just
Mhm.
grabbing everything, that's a signal to lighten up, but if I hit the bottom every 5 to 10 casts, that's pretty good. So that's kind of like where I like to sit. Um, and just last, as we'll move into the other spectrum is our cold water.
Mhm.
A lot of people, in my area think that um, fishing a swung fly is almost impossible to do in the wintertime when that water is about freezing. And that's the opposite. I mean, sometimes we do have to get a little deeper. Typically, our winter flows are a little higher, so we do have to use a slightly heavier sink tip. But getting that down just a little bit will certainly help, because those fish at that time of year are a little bit more sluggish. You have to get down to them. They're not going to be these fish right now that'll swim 10, 15 feet to take a fly. They might only move 6 inches. So that will
Mhm.
happen to depend on, that's where you have that versatility of different sinking leaders that you can kind of run throughout your day of fishing.
So that's the presentation. Well, and so so that's your setup. But along with the presentation, are you typically casting across the stream? Are you doing a slight downstream? When do you make that adjustment? Do you add like subtle strips sometimes in your swing? How do
Yeah.
you go about making those decisions?
Yeah. So, those decisions for me is almost based on every cast. I mean, I get a lot of guys with, my friends at the shop always make fun of me for swinging. It's like, oh, it's just casting out there and let the current take it. And yeah, to a degree, but there's a lot more that you can do into this. I mean, if for myself, say I'm fishing a really fast piece of water, that river's really moving. Sometimes either putting a heavier tip on, or maybe holding your rod out more into the river and letting that line kind of slow down or have a straight presentation, letting that fly really creep across that pool is super important. Where this time of year, like today, I had a lot of times, like I said, the river's low. We don't have as much current as we would typically like this time of year. So, I'm casting almost straight across from me and putting even a downstream end to my stuff just to get more speed on that fly, get that fly moving, more broadside to the current, and let that thing just kind of get as much speed as you can into it. Because, when it comes down to it, we're fishing for predators, we're fishing, we're not fishing, these things want to move and eat, they're hunters. But that's pretty much where I'll kind of put it at is it's kind of like, you'll feel it out. But typically for myself, you can let yourself basically in slightly warmer water, average to warmer water conditions. You can speed that fly up, give them something to chase. They want to move, let them chase it. Same token in the water, when the water is super cold, slowing that line down, holding that rod out in the river more. Just try and get that line to move through that lie as slow as you can. Sometimes is super important.
So then when it comes to flies, the last piece of the equation, how much weight do you put on the fly, and how do you kind of make your adjustments there?
Yeah, so myself, I'm almost always going to use a weighted fly. I'm not a huge fan of unweighted flies. And that being said, I'll have a variety of different weights with me in my box. I'll carry the same fly pattern with, I like tying on my personal stuff. I tie a lot on tube flies. That's mostly what I'm using. But this will go for shanks too. I'm usually using little tungsten beads primarily for the weight in almost all my flies, and I can vary that size of tungsten bead. Like this time of year, low water, I'm fishing a 5/32 bead, tungsten bead that just gets you just past that surface tension, and then you can let your tip kind of do the rest of the work. Where in the winter we got or late fall we got big flows. You can either throw a tungsten cone head on there, large lead eyes. Again, that will come with a little bit of. Some people have a little harder time casting that because it is a little harder to get out of the water. But typically I won't go much past like a 7/32 bead, a tungsten bead, or a tungsten cone. Those are my heavy flies, but I would say my sweet spot, almost all my flies, heavy 3/16 tungsten bead on them, just enough to cut down through that surface and let my tip then do the rest of the work.
It's crazy because I switched over to metric from all my bead sizes because I fish jig stuff, and
Yep.
at one time I could have told you how big that is, but at this point I'm just like,
Yes, yeah, I get that because I dabble in the whole Euro nymphing thing, and it's like,
yeah.
in like the spring, summer months, I got to go to metric, and then, steelhead stuff, I switch back, and it's like, you definitely have that weird period where you got to remember what you're putting on.
All I know is an eighth goes on a size 12 hook. That's all I
That'll
know.
work. Yep.
So this works great for steelhead, for salmon. You also dabble in inland trout doing this. Do you have a trout spay rod?
I do, yeah. I was actually using a trout spay rod today. I was using an 11.5 foot 4 weight today for the steelhead in low water, and it's a beautiful rod. I fish the Delaware system of the Catskills quite a bit, so I fish the West Branch of the Delaware quite a bit, and it's a beautiful rod down there. And with the modern technology now in our industry, we're seeing these spay rods become lighter and lighter and lighter with 2 weights now on the market. It's a great way to fish these bigger trout rivers that we have around here, or around your area. Again, this spay casting, it's meant to put ease on you. You don't have to false cast 9 times to get that line out. It's a quick come back, boom, you're out. It's very, very efficient. It's a great way to cover a lot of water.
And so can you do this from a boat too, a drift boat?
You can. Yep. You can certainly do it from a drift boat. Like a lot of guys in Michigan for steelhead will do them off drift boats. We'll swing off drift boats. Like when I'm up in the Gaspé area fishing for Atlantic salmon, we'll spay fish off of canoes, and do drops through a river. We'll make a couple casts. The guy controlling the canoe will pick up the anchor, let us drift down, maybe 5 feet, and he'll drop the anchor again, and you make another cast. So you can definitely do this off a boat.
How do you target trout differently than steelhead, if at all?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's not too different. I mean, especially coming, people can take their funny pokes at our Great Lakes steelhead, saying they're just big rainbows. And to a degree, I mean, with my trout fishing, I'm not really changing, my trout spay fishing. I'm not changing too much. You're pretty much just changing the leader, downsizing your leader a little bit. You don't have to fish quite as heavy tippet. And fish, you can fish soft tackles. Soft tackles is a great way to to fish these trout systems, especially, you know, during a hatch or just before a hatch, is tie, you know, two soft tackles on a trout spay and let them launch, and you'll pick up quite a few fish doing it. So there's not really much difference. I mean, I fish almost the same flies for my steelhead fishing as I do for my trout spay.
Do you do typically a little bit? Do you go a little bit lighter for your trout stuff? Maybe tip wise at least.
Yeah, tip wise for sure. You know, you can definitely lighten up. Again, typically when we're trout fishing, like the water is a little bit warmer. Like we were saying, those fish are more likely to move. But again, it's having that versatility with more tips is huge, because there's definitely times where I'm fishing sometimes heavier tips for some trout space stuff.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever done it for any of the bass, any of the migratory bass in the?
Certainly, yeah. So, you know, that's one of the huge underrated parts of my home waters is our lake run smallmouth fishing. I'm sure you've taken quite a cracks at our lake run bass, but we have some serious smallmouth fishing around here, and almost all of our tributaries that see, you know, steelhead and salmon will get a run of these beautiful smallmouth. Some even eclipsing that magical 20-inch mark. And yes, you can easily fish that same method, those same styles from steelhead to bass. You can fish your traditional bass flies if you'd like to, but you know, here on our steelhead rivers, on Lake Erie side, you could go on a spring day, you know, catch 2 or 3 steelhead back to back, and then you get into a big pot of smallmouth, literally on the same rig. It's a lot of fun, again, and it's just a nice way with the spay fishing of delivering that payload in a little bit easier fashion.
Yeah, and that's pretty. Those are both. I mean, between steelhead and smallmouth, you're looking at 2 of just the most awesomest fighting fish there is.
Correct.
And
Yep.
I spent a lot of time last summer on the Allegheny, kind of in Tionesta where I was working. And I did I swung clousers most of the time with some strips kind of in my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember like thinking that I would hook these massive smallmouth, and then you'd get it in and it would be like 7 inches. And I was like, and I was fishing a 6 or 7 weight. It's not like I was fishing a small rod at all.
They pull. I mean, you know, like I was just saying, like our spring steelhead, a lot of these smallmouths fight harder than our steelhead. It's insane.
Yeah. They're such incredible fish.
They certainly are.
Yeah. Well, and you said you can catch them on the same stuff, same flies.
Yeah, same stuff, and that's kind of the nice thing, especially, you know, for a beginner angler. You know, you don't have to get a ton of different stuff. I mean, you can fish almost essentially that same rig, you know, almost throughout the year. It's pretty awesome.
So it's kind of a beginner setup kind of deal without breaking the bank, you know, rod and reel, and how important is balancing that together? I know there's your balancing point on your single-handed rod. How do you kind of balance that with the spay rod?
Sure, yeah. So, you know, beginner rods, I mean, typically, like for my area, the Great Lakes area, you know, we have, you know, what's called a switch rod, which is just a smaller 2-handed spay rod. It's an 11-foot rod. An 11-foot 7-weight is a beautiful rod to fish. It's a beautiful spay casting rig. And if you did want to do any single-handed stuff with, like, say, an indicator rig, you could do it with a switch rod, which is kind of nice. So from a best bang for your buck method, that's pretty awesome there. And then, you know, for like you're saying with reels, I mean, yeah, typically we're going to upsize our reels just a little bit more than you would like your traditional, you know, 7, 8 weight, 9 or 10-foot rod. Just because, again, we have a little bit more length on our rod, so we want to try and just balance it out. But it's pretty easy. I mean, most rods nowadays will kind of have like a pairing with it. You know, it's almost like you go to a restaurant, they have a wine pairing, you know, and in most places kind of will set you up pretty good no matter where you go. So luckily nowadays, you know, it's super easy to get a nice, easy, affordable casting rig.
That's good. And so as far as basic line, I'm sure the lines come. So you have a running line, and then you have your shooting head.
Yep.
Is the shooting head weighted specifically for how heavy the rod is,
Yeah.
or is
Yeah.
that based?
Yeah. Good question. So that's kind of the cool part about this whole system. Off the end of that shooting line, you have a little loop, just like the end of your fly line, and all these different types of shooting heads have loops on them. So, you know, unlike very similar to your single-handed rods, how you have your designations of what weight lines to put on them. There are different weights to put for shooting heads. Unfortunately, they're not as similar as like your traditional 7 weight. Our typical spay lines or shooting heads come in grain weights. Each rod will have a little grain window for you, usually of about 100 grains from low end to high end of your rod. As long as you're within that 100 grains, it's going to cast like butter. And that's the beautiful part is you can, these different lines that we're talking about, you kind of, if you really get into it, fish that same reel and, have a couple different weights of rods or lengths of rods, you'll loop on another different weighted, different grain sketch ahead and you're ready to go. You don't have to drop the money and get another reel with it. Once you kind of get into it the first time, there's again a lot of versatility that you can do in this.
Yeah, I mean, even just those cassette reels, like it's annoying to reel it all back in, change the
Yes.
plastic spool. Plus, you have to carry all those spools. Um, Definitely sounds a lot more convenient, in my opinion.
Super convenient, and that's kind of the awesome thing about this whole thing is like the whole spay fishing setup is basically that loop to loop system. Going from your shooting line to your shooting head to your leader, your tip. It's all loop to loop, so it's a nice easy concept for most people to kind of grasp.
So, I'm a bit. I read a lot of like Devin Olson's blogs and stuff just because he's a competition angler and I do that as well.
Yep.
But he was in a situation in Italy where he was fishing. He had a cliff behind him, and they were not allowed to wade into this high alpine lake. So he applied a single-handed spay cast to kind of get some more distance without having to make a long steeple cast or even just smack the cliff that was right behind him.
Mm-hmm.
So how can people that necessarily don't want to invest in the two-handed rods, but just keep their single rod, how can they incorporate spay into their fishing? And what are kind of the limits with that too? Like how does like a weight forward line and the different line types affect kind of your spay cast with a traditional rod?
Sure, yeah. I mean, you can still spay cast with a single-handed rod. The only kind of warning I'll give you is that it's not quite the same. You don't have quite as much power, but really think of it, your weight forward line is kind of like a mini compact shooting head. There's still a diameter difference, and you can do the same exact motions with your hands, those spay casts to fish a standard weight forward line. The limitations are, size of your flies and weight of your leaders to an extent. That's where like a Skagit head will really knock it out of the park. But say for like my nymphing, like around here, like our go-to, Steelhead Great Lakes rod is a 10-foot 7 weight. I can't remember the last time I did a traditional pickup and laydown cast. It's almost all a hybrid spay cast to get my indicator rig back out in the water. I mean, once you kind of get proficient with the spay casts, they're almost limitless. I mean, I'll still even do a little bit when I go do some dry fly fishing. It's really nice, arrow to put in your quiver as an angler, just all around. Is learning some basic, spay casts just in general.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn. It's incredible how all this stuff overlaps in a way.
It is, yeah, and it's something that I'll say is like I've been doing this almost my whole life, and there's still I'm still learning new things to this day, and that's the beautiful part about spay fishing and just fly fishing in general is that you're literally always learning something new, and with today's technology, there seems to be always a next better technique or tool that we can use from year to year, it seems so. That's the other just super awesome part that we get to take use of nowadays.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, have you ever seen anyone use this for muskie at all?
I have. There's a handful of guys here in the in my area that will use these two-handed rods and kind of overhead cast like a traditional cast. These Skagit heads with these big musky flies. I will say that's like one of the limitations of it to an extent. With your typical like 9 foot 10 weight for muskie, it's a little hard to do because you're using just giant half chickens to fish for these things most of the time. But still, there is a little wiggle room for that. Yep.
Yeah, I remember trying to cast one of Nightmare Muskie flies, which was like 12 inches.
Yep.
I'm just like, I can't cast this thing. I'm downsizing a few inches.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's like, we have some lakes around us, my area that we'll muskie fish in, and those giant dragon tails that are, ever so popular. It's like, you put that on. I made a cool little concoction, and after everything got soaked up with water, it's like, after like 30 casts, you're like, oh my God, I need to start working out more, man.
Well, and that, would you say that that's a benefit of fishing too? It's not nearly as hard as.
Ooh, sorry, man, you broke up just a little bit there.
No, that's it. Would you say that's another benefit of spay fishing, is it's not so hard on your shoulder?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, this is, like I said, we're spay fishing, not to look cool, even though it does look cool. But yeah, it's an easy tool to use. You're using very, very little effort to fish, sometimes super, super, super heavy leaders and flies. It's literally effortless once you really get down to it.
Well, yeah, it sounds amazing. I'm really interested. I've actually considered, because I'm in Colorado now, I've actually considered flying home to fish these falls steelhead with a spay rod.
Yeah, man, just let me know. We'll get together.
Yeah. No, my only hesitation is the cat is so variable with flows that I feel like as soon as I book that ticket, it's just going to blow out and be gone for a week.
It can certainly do that. But I will suck them a huge blowout right now. Let's get some water into these creeks, and but like I was saying too, I mean, with the versatility again, I mean, not just for Western New York here, but I'm sure a lot of other areas are like this where, your primary river will blow out, and sometimes you have to go to a slightly smaller river, and you can still use sometimes, those same methods for different styles of creeks. Like I said, just because you have the capability to cast super far doesn't mean you have to. You can fish that same 11-foot 7 weight on some of these smaller, Erie tributaries and do just as good.
Yeah, especially, I mean, because there's a dramatic difference because I fished a lot of Erie tributaries last year and the year before, and there is a dip off in size. So you'd probably get away, you probably use lighter tips there in Erie, most likely. I mean, you get some deeper runs in Elk Creek where I'm sure you could probably drop some depth on them.
Yeah. I mean, certainly. I mean, even through a normal river, a big river, you'll have again that change in depth. In smaller rivers, like I said, again, it's coming back to that versatility, man. Having a few different sinking dips to change in between, because I'll sometimes change, sometimes 6-7 times different tips throughout the day just to make sure I'm really fishing where I need to be.
And so for a smaller stream like an Erie, would you typically go with that kind of that more switch type rod, that 11-foot style versus kind of a longer style? How long is you have that trout spade, but how long is your actual, I don't know how many rods you have, but how long do they go?
Sure. Yeah. No. And I have, you can, if you really get into it, you can go overboard like I am and have a whole bunch. But I have rods that go from 10.5 to 15 feet, where I would say your go-to zone, especially for Great Lakes stuff, is going to be 11 feet. That switch rod. Where for around here when our rivers get big, so even the Niagara River, a 13-foot 7 weight is certainly an easily applicable rod around here. But you can certainly go down the rabbit hole and get as many rods as you'd like.
Yeah, well, that's every time I walk into a fly shop and someone asks me, he's like, "Can I help you with anything?" I'm like, "No, fly shops are a dangerous thing."
They certainly are. And working in one is super rough, man. It's like every time I'm like, I don't need that, but that's pretty cool. So
yeah, I can only imagine. I completely forgot about that. What is probably the biggest mistake that you see someone make that's just starting out?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and it's overpowering. It's people forcing that cast. They're trying to really oomph it out there because they have this bigger rod. That's not the case. Lighten back. We're first of all, we're out there to fish. We're out there to relax. Take it easy. This isn't a race. We're not trying to show off to anybody. Is ease up and slow down. I see so many people just whipping that rod back and forth. We're not, in a NASCAR race. Slow it down and keep it steady. That's the biggest tip I'll give to people for the casting.
Yeah, and I mean, even because I fish a very soft Euro nymphing rod,
Hmm.
so I get away with whipping, and I hardly cast when I Euro nymph.
Yep.
But when the other guide was showing me how to cast, I was like, wow, he really goes really slow. Like it's a slow process.
Hmm.
And even when you watch our normal caster, when you watch them cast, like even they are moving pretty slow. Versus me, I'm trying to like whip and then shoot it as hard as I can and try to smack the wall on the other side.
Yeah,
It
man. I
just
mean, it's really we're out here to have fun and not, if you start whipping it, yeah, it'll go out, but at the end of the day, you're gonna get some of that sore shoulder. And
yeah,
get the ice pack ready because you're gonna need it, and we're out here, take it easy, slow it down, let's have some fun.
yeah. So just kind of wrapping up, what are kind of some trips that you have envisioned in a perfect world that you would love to take?
Sure,
Where
yeah.
would you go?
So now another good question is so I was super bummed for my Norway trip. That's totally rescheduled for 2021. I'm praying to every god out there that it's gonna happen. Because that is certainly a bucket list trip that me and my father have been wanting to do our whole lives. And so that's one. And next year, hopefully, getting out to either British Columbia or in Montana, the trout capital of the U.S. again, to do that kind of stuff again.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I actually just wanted to tell you because you went to the Bighorn with the Spy Fishing International, and I went the year after.
Yes. Yep.
I'm flying out Thursday. My brother actually lives in Bozeman now,
Yep. Yeah, I know.
so I'm flying out Thursday, so I'll be there Thursday for 10 days. So,
That's awesome. You're gonna kill it, man. I mean, that's one of those places I look back on and I'm like, man, if I it's just incredible. I mean, that river at the Bighorn, I mean, that thing is just intense. A lot of fish.
yeah, that's awesome. Well, man, I appreciate you chatting with me. I learned a lot. Is there anything you'd like to add? How can people find you, reach out if they do want to private message you about maybe learning some other stuff?
Yeah, no, and thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully, we can do it again sometime. And if you ever get out here, we can do it maybe an on the water thing. But yeah, no, to get a hold of me, so my Instagram handle is spay_bum1. Or you could give me, if you're in the Western New York area, stop in Orvis, Buffalo. We're right in the town of Williamsville, New York. Or even if you're out of town, and you want to have any questions, feel free to give us a call at the shop at 716-276-7200, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. And if you need gear, I can certainly ship it to you. So that's certainly an option too.
That sounds good, man. Is there anything else you'd like to add, share, comment, scream at the camera?
No, I
Tell your
just
dad that he's such a good thing.
yeah. No, I just hopefully we can get back to a semi-normal world again and do some traveling. And I'm just really looking forward to getting on some water soon. I mean, fall's my favorite time of year, and I'm just hoping to really get at it.
That sounds good, man. I appreciate you. I hope the water floods for you, and then you get some good runs. And praying everything works out for this coming year.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
Well,
Well, hope.
that's it. Yeah, that's gonna do it.
All
Sorry to
right,
cut
buddy.
you off. Dude.
No, you're good,
Yeah.
dude. Take it easy. This was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, see you. Let's do it soon. I would love to do that on the water video, or even if we don't make a video, just we hang out and fish.
Sounds
That's
good,
all that
man.
matters.
Yeah, true. I'll bring the beer.
Sounds good. I'll see you, man.
See you, buddy.
See you. I don't know. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for actually the official episode number 1 of the Real Life podcast. Again, I just want to say thank you to Adam for coming on and chatting with me. It was super insightful, and I'm actually really interested in trying out this method. I'm going to probably have to dip into some capital and get a Spey rod. I really want to fish the Colorado River here with a Spey rod this fall. Maybe I can borrow one from a buddy, but we'll see. So this is a tactic that I'm super excited about and really interested in incorporating into my everyday fishing. So I personally learned a lot. I hope you guys all learned a lot. Please go check out Adam. Ask any questions that you have, either through DM or call from the shop, like he said. And again, just want to thank him, and I hope you all have a wonderful day and a wonderful rest of your night.